No, we're
No.
not. We're not live. We have the freedom to edit. There's no video, so if things feel weird or get weird,
Oh God,
things are gonna get weird, Flint. we can, but we've got the free. This won't come out until when, right?
it'll be next Sunday, the 19th.
Great. Am I well enough lit? I mean, do we have any?
There's not going to be any video portion. We're not even recording the video. It's going to be pure audio.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
So you can take your shirt off if that's your preference. Just do whatever feels right.
Megatron must be stopped, no matter the cost. Cybertron!
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Autopod Decepticast, your bi-weekly podcast that delivers an episode-by-episode breakdown of the original G1 series. This is your host, Aaron, along with co-hosts Ryan and Caleb, and you've caught us on a rare day. This is one of those extra special episodes where we get to settle down, take a break, and do something a little different. Our guest today will need no introduction to those of us who are stuck in Arrested Development and still obsessed with the G1 Transformers phenomenon well into our 30s and 40s. We're going to be talking to writer, story editor, producer, story consultant for many shows we grew up on, most important to us, of course, Transformers, G.I. Joe, Inhumanoids, Visionaries, and, of course, his magnum opus, in my opinion, Timmy's special delivery, A Precious Moment's Christmas. Flint Dille, thank you for hanging out with us.
Already.
So, you're here. You're making the rounds with your book, The Gamesmaster, almost famous in the geek 80s. We'll get to the book, but we want to talk about what everybody wants to talk about, which is Hamilton. Do you love it or really love it?
Okay, I haven't watched it yet.
How dare you?
Why are you obsessed with this?
So I have no opinion on Hamilton, but I will shortly. You have to have me back, and I'll give you my full opinion.
There you go.
Okay, we'll give you that opportunity. Well, I'll just describe us real quick, the Autopod Decepticast, so you kind of know the context of the people you're working with. So we're three lifelong friends. We've actually known each other since kindergarten. We've been a podcast for what, 3 or 4 years now?
Started of spring 2017.
So over the initial impetus for us getting together, we published weekly podcasts in which each episode of our podcast analyzed a single minute of screen time of Transformers, the 1985 movie. So we would spend 30 to an hour and a half, depending on what kind of hijinks we had going on, talking about a minute of screen time. We described the action. We cracked a lot of childish jokes. We made fun of everything, but we also went as deep as we could. And I'm sure we still didn't hit everything. And there's some true nerds out there that will call us out on things that we miss. But
Horribly incomplete.
yeah, and one of the segments of our program was that a favorite segment was we would break down the differences between a couple of scripts that we had and what we saw on screen. So we had what we believe was kind of a later draft that you were probably mostly responsible for from the editing standpoint that was basically 95% accurate to what was on screen. And then what we believe is the earliest known draft, maybe not the first or the second.
It's an early Ron Friedman draft, but it's definitely not the first or second.
And we would talk about it as a psychedelic fever dream, but it's actually a very entertaining, imaginative piece of work. So that's the context of where we got started. We actually finished that project. We went on to do G.I. Joe, the movie as well, not minute by minute, more 10 minute by 10 minute. We can't do that again. And now we talk about G1 Transformers episodes and do the same thing, not minute by minute, again, episode by episode. So that's the kind of people you're working with, just so you know.
Right. You are relatively enthusiastic fans, yeah.
Yeah, you could say that.
Well, two of us are. Caleb, I'm going to throw him right under the bus. He's just kind of the third that just has nothing better to do.
I watched the shows as a kid, but I think I'm pretty much a glutton for punishment at this point. You know?
Right now, do you like watch them live while you're talking about them, or
We watch it beforehand, prepare our notes. We just, as a matter of the process, we have it on. It's usually on mute, but if we note a line or something that we definitely want to take note of, we'll play it live. So we do watch it live, but it's not necessarily Mystery Science Theater. We prepare for it.
Right. So, all right, let me ask Ryan something before we begin here, just because it just fascinates me. Having just finished a book about this. Okay, Ryan, you've actually read the book.
Yes.
How close is what I say in the book to what you already thought?
I will say this, like, I got it from Audible, the Gamesmaster, and by the time this comes out, the hardcover will be available. But I listened to it in probably 2 days. Like, I couldn't stop. It was so, and I really enjoyed the way it was like a linear shot from, essentially when you got out of college to like the end of the 80s. Do you want to actually tell our audience what your book is about?
Sure. No, the reason I was asking was part of the reason I wrote it was, people ask me, you get asked the same questions a lot, and a lot of them were like print interviews. And so what I would do is I'd just drag them to a Google Doc when I did them. And all of a sudden, people kept asking, and I found out 150 pages in a Google Doc. And I said, I had to make this, a book. And then I started putting, sections of it in Facebook and people to ask more questions. It was a lot of it was sort of product tested on Facebook. In fact, the title of Gamesmaster was crowdsourced on my page. I found an agent on my Facebook page and ultimately found my publisher on my Facebook page. So there you go. That kind of a project. Anyway, so that's what was interesting to me is because there's so much lore kind of around how all this stuff happened. And remember, I only have one perspective on it. What I did do is I had everybody involved who's still alive and semi-functional. Had them all read it and tell me, look, if there's anything I say about you that's wrong or there's something I don't say or whatever, because I'm trying to create kind of a meta, world of this where everybody in the book writes their own sections, where either I got it wrong or some story I didn't tell or something I didn't know or whatever. So you end up with this body of work that, because that was just a really cool period.
Ryan, you had a good question about just the 80s in general.
I did. I want to answer the question you asked me, Flint, a little bit better. It wasn't what I expected. It was in like the most amazing way. It was so much more. Like I expect it. There was stuff I have like 20 pages of just as I was going through making notes of stuff that we definitely can't ever get to in this interview. But like there was obviously I mainly knew about your Transformers work, but the stuff that was like before that, the G.I. Joe stuff, the Inhumanoids, the Visionaries, and then just the general like what that world was like at the time. And that was kind of my question is that's a through line through the whole book of just like how the sort of magical confluence of creativity and opportunity that happened in the 80s in general, and in your career in particular. I was wondering if you could just, what do you think that made that so special?
Well, that's really, the question I wanted to pose in the book. I can answer it the best I can answer it, but it's kind of for everybody.
Yeah.
But I think what happened is that first of all, it was just a really great decade. You can argue it was the last great decade. I don't know that I fully make that argument, but it was a great one.
It'll always be a subjective argument.
Subjective. Fun. Yeah, it also helps that you're young and a lot of exciting stuff's happening to you and all that. That's helpful. So what was happening in that period is that all the elements were kind of together for a golden age. It was all these medias were coming together. And I saw a microcosm in it. The first story in the book is we're writing the, prime death scene, the fight. And I'm doing it with Steve Gerber. And Steve Gerber was really much more of a G.I. Joe figure than a Transformer figure. I don't even think he wrote a Transformers, but he's just a great story editor. I'm sitting there and he's got this guy coming over for lunch and Hildy says, hey, your lunch is here. This guy comes in, and he's got a Batman comic book he's doing, and we're trying to figure out how Batman and Superman can fight. And you have to remember that, like, unlike anybody else in the story, I was not, I read comic books until the summer before. I think the last time I read them was the summer before I went into high school, and I didn't read comic books in high school. And didn't even think about comic books again, except, when I was at Berkeley, I'd stop by the comic shop just because I thought it was pretty amazing there was even such a thing as a comic shop. So what it was, and of course it turns out it's Frank Miller and he's trying to figure out the Dark Knight. and so it's your perfect microcosm, that of all of a sudden comic book guys are crashing into animation guys. Steve Gerber, was an animation guy himself. And then I was really more a game guy. And that was, I think I was the only one. I was working with Gary Gygax, who created Dungeons and Dragons, doing stuff. And so all of those influences crashed into each other at the exact moment when Hasbro had an incredible amount of money and 3 Phenomenon going and was able to subsidize, 300 episodes of TV shows. It was just a unique world. And so, it was a perfect golden age.
Commerce and art were colliding in ways that actually allowed you to, sounds like, be more imaginative than maybe other time periods.
Working with those guys, with Sunbow guys, Jay Bacall and Joe and Tom and Carol and all that, and and obviously our office and Hasbro, that was the most creative freedom I've ever had. I mean, you could say it's a 22-minute commercial, but even the stuff that they asked us to do, like they were actually trying to sell toys. So every episode they'd say, "Hey, put in the Hiss tank and ashtray and dipstick and we're discontinuing Good Ornament." And it's like, oh, okay. Even that forced good stuff out. A Bolt Joe and Transform. They didn't say you couldn't use the main characters. They just said, we want to, emphasize Tailpipe in this episode. Give him a theme.
Right. Yeah, Tailpipe was everybody's favorite. And actually, I was an ashtray guy, but when it comes to Transformers, we're aware of I guess it's a relatively famous memo that you wrote to help align all the different writers on different continuity issues like Autobots Don't Fly, and that just made us curious about your role. Kind of pre-Transformers the movie. You're credited as story editor and associate producer for something like 30 episodes. What is that gig exactly? How'd you fall into it?
Oh, okay. Well, I just had, Ryan knows all about it, but I just had this disastrous experience at Lucasfilm. So it's summer of 1984, right? You got Olympics, you got an election coming up, it's that summer. And I had to finish. I had 3 books I was writing with Gary, so I had something to do. I came back one day. Steve Gerber called and he said, "Hey, I'm falling behind on GI Joe." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, "Well, it's this." I think I knew what it was at that point, but you can hit people with real fists. That was his pitch to me because we'd been working in Saturday morning animation where you couldn't do anything. So I went over and was ghost story editing for Steve, and not really ghost. Sunbow was paying me. And what was really embarrassing was, I think it was maybe the first script I read for him was one by Christy Marks. It was an early one. I can't remember the title of it off the top of my head, but it's an early Christy Marks. And I read it, and I sent back. I said, "I don't really have any notes. This may or may not be my vision of the show, but it is absolutely complete to his own vision. All the dialogue's dead on. Frankly, I can't really find anything to change. I mean, I know you're hiring me to edit, and I should be trashing a bunch of stuff, but there's really nothing to trash." And what Steve said is, I talked to Jay Bacall this morning. He said exactly the same thing. And so I knew I was in sync with these guys. I figured that was a career-ending injury, but it wasn't. Yeah, I was editing a bunch of the season 1, shows, after the miniseries. I had nothing to do with that. Brown's miniseries. And then the guys from Joe and Tom, Joe Bacall and Tom Griffin, flew out and said, "Hey, we want to hire you as an associate producer." And I said, "What's that?" What do I do? And we want you to do more story editing, but you'll go to the recording sessions, you'll go to the sweetening sessions. And I wasn't quite that ignorant. I just graduated from SC Film School. So it wasn't like I was totally ignorant, but there, when I was a writer before that at Ruby Spears, I wasn't asked to do stuff like that. I didn't go to voice recordings. I didn't listen to music stings. I didn't comment on music. I didn't, go to mixes. I didn't do any of that stuff. And so now I was doing all that stuff, and it was really cool. I mean, it was relentless. We had an order for 65 episodes. So
is the literal job almost a project management role? Do you have input on every creative aspect of it, but ultimately the job is to get the episode done?
Both of those things are true. I mean, a lot of it was just stuff that happened far away, like that we would get, character bios and character models. And so that was largely created for us. But, there's a wide gulf between, what's, sitting in 4 sentences on the back of a bubble box and what the character actually does in the show.
Right.
So you'd be writing audition dialogue for the actors. They come in with Flame Out, and so what you have to do is you have to figure out, who Flame Out talks like, and and what their attitude is. I just don't want people to look like I'm picking on a character, because I've discovered that at conventions and stuff, people get sensitive about.
You're not going to make us sensitive, so I don't care what you do.
I'm just inventing fake characters to.
That's also funny, so just keep doing that too.
I mean, not everybody talks to you about dipstick, but anyway, so we had a Bible, and I saw one of these things on eBay. I have a closet behind me here that probably has all this stuff in there. There's several holy grails in there if I ever get around to cleaning it out. But we had a Bible that was in this big red binder that had all the character descriptions and character models and copy. But the point is everything a character had amounted to about a page.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and how it was Xeroxed.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get that, and then early on, Sunbow would provide springboards and things like, Cobra creates a weather mastering. Am I answering your question, by the way?
Well, you are in what I would call the Dille style, which is what we signed up for.
Specifically what they were hiring me to do was, my core suit was as a writer.
Mm-hmm.
But they weren't really. Oh, that's our phone, which of course I can't not have ring because it's our phone. But I can shove it in my drawer and it'll make quiet down. Because it's always somebody trying to, have you had your carpets cleaned lately? Yeah, that's just what I was thinking about doing this week.
What would Bob Budiansky name a transformer that turned into a phone? Dial tone. Okay, moving on.
Already a
joke.
Never
mind. Okay, that's a joke.
In this case, it would be rotary because it was the 80s, right? No, it's anyway. Right, so in this circular way. So in the course of, tactically in the course of a day, what I would do is, I'd probably start, pretty early in the morning and be editing a script. Mm-hmm. Okay. I only wrote scripts if a script had fallen out. And what that means is we get a draft and it's just not usable.
Right.
Or the writer gets another project, or they don't deliver, or the dog eats his homework, whatever happens, that. So every script I wrote for Joe was something, usually written in less than, 48 hours, and was something because
you had a gap, a production gap of some sort, because a script was not delivering.
Right. Exactly. But remember, at that point, I'm writing them. I know these characters intimately inside and out, and have 50 story ideas of my own. So it's not like I'm some world speed writer. It's just I know.
You had the background, so you could do it.
So I could do it, and sometimes it'd just be easier than editing it. It's just to write a new one. Some scripts were so heavily edited they might as well have been scripts that I wrote. Some scripts, like Christie's, came in with nothing that needed doing. It was just it was a wild array. So storytelling could be any of that. But usually, I'd be on the phone with Jay for a couple hours going over scripts. Then they'd send out storyboards, and we'd go over the storyboards, which was always kind of fun and fascinating. I viewed it as kind of a B priority because it wasn't really a gating thing, and other people were going over the storyboards. Mm-hmm. Going too granular for you? Or is this okay?
No. I'm a process person. I'm intrigued by processes, and I'm assuming a storyboard you might go over if you're story editing in the morning and then moving into storyboard. That storyboard is an episode where a script has probably been approved weeks prior.
And then I would go into the office. I've never been much of an office guy, but nor was anybody, except Buzz. I think Buzz went in more than anybody because his wife was working at UCLA. I mean, the office was literally a walk down the hill from me. It was in Westwood, and I live in Westwood. I go into the office if there was something to do there. If if a writer was coming over and we're meeting with them on a script, or if somebody was in town, or if I was just bored and wanted to go hang out at the office, or for whatever reason, would go in there. But there wasn't any requirement to be in the office.
From an art visual standpoint, did you know who Floro Derry was, or ever collaborate with him in any way? I know he designed a lot of the early characters and a lot of the concept art pieces. Is that name familiar to you?
No, the name is not familiar to me.
Okay.
But bear in mind, all things in the world that were utterly invisible to me.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In other words, once the stuff got sent off to be animated, it was sent off, somewhere on the other side of, Lincoln Boulevard or the PCH, Korea or Japan or somewhere.
Yeah.
And that was invisible. And I didn't see or know or hear anything until it came back. And it, that was its own adventure. For the Transformers, like when you're talking season 2, season 1, and Joe in that period, usually what you sent out was what came back.
Mm-hmm.
There were always mistakes and there were always things missing and there were always, edits. By season 3 of Transformers, it got really dicey.
Right.
So I do that. Then if we had a voice recording that day, then I'd head over to Wally Burr's.
Mm-hmm.
And Wally Burr had a couple different studios. I think he did at one point simultaneously at 2 different studios. But Wally was the voice director.
Right.
Okay, so I mean, you with the aesthetic of it is, and he had a studio on Ventura Boulevard that I vaguely remember, and there was one other one, but the one I really remember was on Hollywood Way up near Burbank Airport. Really kind of cool stretch where there was a game store, one of the like the best game store, and there was a train store. They sold model trains. So that was cool. There was
nice.
A model train store on the street. It was this weird little urban anomaly kind of an area where everything on the street was cool.
Sure.
Anyway, so so basically Wally, it was invisible to me whether Wally owned the building or whether he just owned the studio or whether he rented it or anything like that. I just showed up and the actors were there and Wally was there and he'd usually have an engineer, at least one engineer with him. And because the engineer was either messing with the microphones, you always had like half an hour of, hey, what's that microphone? I'm hearing a pee pop on there. I never once heard a pee pop. I mean,
we have our own version of that where it's like 20 minutes before we get to record anything.
Well, that's the way it worked. But those were some of the most interesting moments. If I'm getting too granular, feel free to. You can treat me like an interactive object and fast forward.
Just to reiterate, Mr. Dille, we covered the Transformers movie 1 minute at a time. You do not worry about being granular.
Mostly got edited out of the book because a lot of people reading or their heads were hitting the table and all that. That's why I'm saying that's why it's cool to do these supplemental things. Anyway, so so I'd go into Wally Burr's, the actors would be there, and you'd have that 20 minutes, half an hour before anything happened. And we started using it, when everybody was in the mood. Once again, it just sort of depended on the day and the circumstances. But on a typical sun-baked LA day, when you had, the kind of cast people who are easy to work with, and the majority of them were there, we do a read-through. And eventually, okay, voice actors warming up doing a read-through is like, and a lot of them were comedians, worked in the Belly Room or at the Comedy Store or the Laugh Factory or somewhere. And there were times you were hearing the 2 a.m, Blue Show at the Belly Room, it was the Transformer script, A lot of
star screams, making dick joke kind of situations.
That's you can that's 2 shows of its own. But yeah, but because these were the best voice actors in that area, and I think after a while they began to realize we were something different, because a lot of them would be, I'm doing, Transformers from 10 to noon, and I'm doing Smurfs in the afternoon, and I'm doing the Comedy Show at 9, and, that's my life. But they finally realized we were, and I think it was true. We were really going for something, because my role was kind of weird and unique in that I was simultaneously, what I really am is this kid a couple years out of film school. Okay. In almost all these situations, I was probably the youngest person in the room. I was also, a writer who gets no respect whatsoever. That didn't buy me anything. And being a story editor didn't buy me anything. However, working for Sunbow, I was also an ad executive, kind of in a weird, nobody ever treated me. That wasn't really my title, but I represented the client. Mm-hmm. We were paying for it. Right. I was the person in the room paying for all the stuff.
Right.
And I realized, and so they had to treat me in a weird way. And a lot of times people would be very annoyed and upset by the fact that, because when these guys would do the read through the script and in the blue version of it, oddly enough, some of the stuff that came out was really good. Not all of it was pornography. I mean, a lot of it was just funny, different ways of doing the line. Mm-hmm. And I realized these actors, even though at first they can't. How can they possibly be invested in Dipstick, right?
Mhm.
But however, they'd all of a sudden get to know Dipstick, and you realize they are the repository of Dipstick. When I'm editing Dipstick or I'm writing Dipstick, he's like a chess piece I'm moving around. I'm trying to get the dialogue the best I can, but all of a sudden you got the real actor with the real voice, with the real institutional knowledge, and they'll tune Dipstick's lines better.
Right. They're invested as well, over time, especially.
The idea of tuning lines was not something that was done very often in Saturday Morning in the kind of recording that they'd done, because everything had been approved by the network. And so if you wanted to change a line, you probably had to go back to the network and get them to reapprove it. Whereas if I wanted to change a line, I tried to say, okay, let's get the line as written.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm really liking, Frank Welker's other line on this. So let's get that line and use as a take. And if somebody has some big issue with it, but
because you're kind of the executive in the room, you have the freedom to let them do that and ultimately make the decisions on what goes in or not. It sounds like.
That is correct.
Right.
So when the executive in the room, however, it wasn't like I had any kind of unlimited power. It would manifest in, we were getting some complaints from Marvel that you were changing a lot of stuff because also I had an incredibly reckless disregard for how much work I'm making for people, because I honestly didn't know.
Right.
And you have to bear in mind, I've been working for people like Roger Corman, where people walked around saying stuff like, pain only lasts a few moments, film is forever, and the kind of Bushido, John Milius USC Film School. So that was my orientation. I mean, it's like I thought everybody behaves like an auteur. Okay, so what you were doing is imposing that on top of a system that was normally very rigid.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, the different producers had different attitudes towards it. Jim Duffy'd pretty much go with, anything I did. He'd just kind of nod and just, and just do it and and all these people had suggestions. Wally had suggestions. Once everybody got used to this, it's an environment where we can change the dialogue. Let's get a cover. Let's get a safety of the real line. Let's go change it and make it better.
It was a culture that maybe didn't exist in animation about caring about the product and not just cranking it out. And tell me if I'm kind of reading into this incorrectly, but I assume for a lot of these people, you don't know if this gig is going to last, but you start to realize it is last and it has impact, and you start to care, and you appreciate the culture that this particular project brings to the table. And whether it's Transformers and Joe, and if there's other projects that are the same kind of producers involved and the similar actors, you're going to have a good time on set and have something that lasts creatively, if not fiscally, forever.
That's the way we approached it.
Right.
Because everybody I was working with were workaholics and fanatics and actually really cared. I'm working with Steve Gerber. I mean, Steve Gerber never, he would do things that some were better than others, but you never once, ever under any circumstance, did I get the impression he didn't care.
Right.
I mean, he always cared. He almost cared too much. Marty Pasco, is like fanatic. Buzz is loose and everything, but I mean, he went out and did the best stuff. He'd just take chances other people wouldn't. He was just kind of like the stunt man of our production team. That alarm you're hearing is my son finding out that he has a brunch he's got to go to in a few minutes. Anyway, so
you're in the recording studio. Sorry, I keep interjecting.
I was gonna.
You guys aren't in a hurry. Let's. I'm willing to go as granular as you want. I mean,
yeah. I found it interesting. That's one of the things that you were talking about just now about that is also in the book, where it seems like every new job you took, there were hidden things that you just had to figure out, that nobody was interested in telling you how stuff worked. And that was kind of like how it became a friction of like the producers just wanted to get it done. And you're like, well, maybe we get another line.
Well, yeah. I mean, because remember the producers, there's a whole game going on. I can't remember whether I left the section about the unions and, kind of the whole recording game. But there was a whole recording game going on that was invisible to me. Okay. And it was great that I was a game designer, because sooner or later I figured it out. And that was that it all worked on a favor bank. There are kind of the official rules with the unions. There's what people are, we feel like we're paying for half a day, and so when somebody wants to go scooting out after an hour, it's like, huh? What happened to half a day?
Right.
Okay. And the culture there was that these guys all were doing multiple shows because these were the top voice talent in town. And if their Boogle Baby show, had to be recorded, they'd,
that was a big hit.
Boogle Babies. Yeah, their Boogle Baby show, had to be recorded. They're off doing Spanko from Boogle Babies. And the guys would, take off. And I thought that was really weird, because it's like, we're paying you for half a day and you're not here for half a day.
Right.
But I mean, my attitude was just more, come on, are we going to stay here and get this right? Because
Right.
I didn't know that, it does a demolition derby on producers when I all of a sudden start changing lines and they have to change the timing of the whole show.
Right.
That much work, and then when people got used to it, and so they complained a couple times to Sunbow, and the guys at Sunbow made me look like a kind of some lukewarm mercenary or something. So because they wanted the best show they could have. I mean, everybody approached it like, every one of these things is this piece of art, because we also knew we're up against a schedule where we're doing 65 half hours a year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, our TV show has 13 episodes maybe, and they may be hour long, but still, even for a half hour show, you do have to have a whole script and a beginning and a middle and an end. It's just, it's different bulk, but it's the same, the exact same, organism.
I wonder if it is that your inexperience at the time helped drive that special thing for groups of people that were used to just going through the motions in a way. And it is a challenge to them in a way because they're used to people letting them do what they want to do. And
So, yeah.
and you're messing with their routine, but that creates something special.
Yeah.
It did. And over time, it evolved. People got used to the idea, I learned things like you can't have a piece of dialogue that's 16 times as long as the one that was originally in there. Okay, we tended to select for actors who would be around, and Wally tended to schedule them differently. Because remember, the flip side of it is Wally would call these guys in and they'd do favors. If they got to get out early to do, Boogle Babies, it's like he'd call back for some retakes later on and they'd come in and didn't bill them for the retakes.
Right.
That's how I think it worked.
Right.
Okay. All of it,
The favor trading part of it.
I don't remember ever sitting down. Nobody ever sat down and had a conversation. Okay, Bozo, here's how it works. This is a whole ecology that, but these people knew that they had, they were doing a show that had 65 half hours. And after a point, different people reacted different ways. But the producers were thrilled because the other thing was all of our shows were number one, unless they were 2 or 3 or 4 to something else we were doing.
Right.
Like Joe and Transformers, Duke It Out back and forth, and My Little Pony was hanging in there. Super Sunday, it was like always number 3 behind Joe and Transformers. So I mean,
if you weren't getting results, you might not have been able to continue your methods.
Exactly. Yeah, getting results drive a lot. And people, people thought, syndicated stuff. It's when I walked in there. Syndicated stuff was looked at as this weird crap, and the real show was Saturday morning. By the time we were done, syndication was the real show, and Saturday morning was being carried out in a body bag.
Mm-hmm.
I'm being a little harsh here, but I mean, that's kind of true culturally. I mean, just take a look at it.
Right.
And even like with the actors, I mean, they'd come in and say, "Wow, my nephew, found out I was, crankshaft," and like. I mean, I was a culture hero to him. Well, that didn't happen to him when he was doing Boogle Babies.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a whole different stake there.
It drives excitement for everybody involved.
These guys, when I run into them at conventions now, they're really thrilled that we did different stuff. So we also had a different kind of a cast. Guys like Chris Latta would not have been hired under any circumstances anywhere for any reason on an animated Saturday morning show, other than somebody. And then Joe Bacall sees him, in some, basement, dive in Greenwich Village, at 3:00 in the morning, and realizes this guy's something different.
Did you or Joe have any input on casting, or was that all handled through Wally and his team?
Great deal. Casting was one of the major duties of that. Is the way casting would work. I mean, the early characters were all cast before I got there. All those season 1 characters. Mm-hmm. One of my first jobs was because they were constantly cycling in new characters. you start out with 5 characters or 10, 5 good guys, 5 bad guys, and maybe a couple larger playset kind of characters in season 1. You end up with 135 characters by season 4. There's a lot of casting to do, right?
Right.
Usually I would write a little bit. You'd usually have some hook or some cue. They'd say, hey, this guy talks like John Madden.
Right.
Okay. And, I kind of go, well, what's that mean? And then I think, well, yeah, Madden uses a lot of onomatopoeia. He's very enthusiastic. Yeah, a lot of boom, stuff like that. I'm trying to remember who's the character that says boom all the time and stuff like that.
Warpath.
Probably.
Yeah, and so it would manifest that way. So I would write up dialogue that said boom in it, and then we'd audition the actors, and they would interpret it different ways, and then sometimes you would actually hear what looked really great on my word processor when I was writing it. When in the real world, when you hear it, it really sucks. So I viewed auditions as a time to kind of tune the character. So we had a whole lot of input into that. Now, the practical reality was you couldn't have a different actor playing every different character. So if somebody's playing, Flint or Duke or something like that, they union allowed them to do 3 characters. So if you had
at a time.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So if you had someone come in, you would try to have the guy playing the feature character also playing spittoon, and minor characters underneath that. Or, if the voices were different enough. Some actors you would have no idea it was the same person, doing the voice. I mean, they're just shockingly versatile. Other actors, could do things with their voice. Frank Welker does things with his voice that like a real human being can't do. I mean, I remember auditioning for the Insecticons. Okay, basically the rule is Frank can have any role he wants, but and they're saying, it's like, well, okay, he's a robot and he's a cricket, so you put a little more cricket in there. Okay, a little more robot, throw some reverb, and he could do it. I mean, nowadays you'd need some kind of synthesizer to do that. It was stunning just to watch it. But all these guys had incredibly strong suits. Some had great pipes. Some were great actors. Some had incredible ability to mutate their voices, and some had just such strong persona.
Mm-hmm.
Like
a scat man.
Scatman's your perfect example in a very different way. Chris,
mm-hmm.
I mean, there's Cobra Commander and Starscream and Decompose were all the same guy. Because he did crazy on anybody, and then there's the other thing that people like him, Arthur Burghardt, brought an energy and an attitude into the room that if anybody had the idea that they were doing booble babies, that left very quickly,
right?
Because you had crazy people walking around. Arthur's not crazy. He's just and Scatman was. I mean, all these guys were great. They're like huge personalities too.
Before we transition to Joe, I had some questions about Prime Target.
Prime Target, by the way, was a perfect example. Actually, it's worth 2 minutes about Prime Target. Ask questions about Prime Target.
Well, the Prime Target piece was, and I think part of this might be in the book when I talked to Ryan.
It is. There's a portion in the book that's
about
great.
it. That was your first credited writer episode, as far as I could tell, and that was a collaboration with Buzz Dixon as well. It was it seemed like there was a most dangerous game element to it. I was just curious about the confluence of influences that led to that piece.
Well, that is a really great question. I want to answer that question. Okay, what there's your perfect example of something had fallen out. It might have been, Ryan will tell you about the glove mode script. It might have been that one. That's the story in the book. Glove mode. Okay, but by an extremely talented writer, but you just didn't pay attention to the Bible. But anyway, it's part of the reason we wrote that document you referred to later on is, okay, here's what the show is.
Mm-hmm.
On the page, here's what it is. Because imagine you're just some writer being called in to write a Transformers, and here are 134 characters, and so you had to write the document that said, okay, it sounds more complicated than it is. Anyway, Prime Target fell out for whatever reason. I mean, whatever was supposed to be in that slot. Get the call. We got to have a script by Thursday. It's Tuesday. Okay, and I had been really fascinated by the idea. Once again, being a game guy, at that exact moment, I'm sitting there playing. Incredibly complex miniatures games up on a sand table at the Dungeon and Dragon Mansion. And I didn't think we'd done enough with environment. I'd always been wondering why isn't somebody trying to trap the Transformers? Why aren't buildings, car washes trying to trap them? And we don't use the environment. That's a real game issue. And I tried to sneak that into games ever since then. And everybody else thinks I'm on drugs and doesn't want to deal with it. But that's something to really do. And that was probably around the time we were starting on the Transformers the movie. And my feeling was Cybertron ought to just be alive with weird things that move in strange ways and unpredictable,
traps,
so
places to get lost.
Let's just start with most dangerous game. Let's say some guy is out there hunting the Transformers, because there was also a lot of pressure when I was writing scripts or when we were doing something off the mainstream to do something really different. And so I tended to do scripts where Joe and Cobra, weren't really enemies, and the Autobots and Decepticons had common enemies and things like that, just because it was different. It wasn't just blow up the headquarters and stop, Megatron one more time.
Right.
So, we had this big game hunter, and first he captures a MiG, and then he captures a tank, and, and finally he decides, I'm going to catch Optimus Prime, and he ends up, working with the Decepticons and all that. But my impulse was, okay, let's have stuff move, let's use the environment, which we sort of did in the episode. I mean, there are a few examples of it. But
you're also taking them out of their typical environment either way, whether it's about traps. They're not fighting on the desert of Portland or whatever. Yeah.
It was not a desert episode. And frankly, when I first Transformers, I just got sick and tired of desert episodes, which has... Ryan will tell you has its own interesting origin, because that was all the John Ford Western stuff that figures into the book. Anyway, because remember, Optimus Prime was kind of really early on. He was kind of John Wayne until he became his own kid. And so I called Buzz, because if you want something done really quickly and really correctly, you call Buzz. Mm-hmm. He's just fast, fearless. And I knew he would deliver a script, and but we may have done it where I wrote all the trap scenes and he wrote Chumley and all that stuff. I don't remember how we did it, but at that point, I'd done so much stuff with Buzz that it's kind of like it's like watching the Rolling Stones playing and COVID on a Zoom. I mean, it's not like Charlie Watts is wondering what Keith Richards is going to do. Just know. And so, sure enough, 24, 48 hours later, we had the script, and that was Prime Target.
Eventually, the Friedman script for Transformers the movie crosses your desk. And the way the story of, as I've read it, is you and Jay Bacall get together and you feel like maybe the script is a little less than lucid. And so you go on a kind of a ego-fueled bender to create your own version of the movie, The Secret of Cybertron. But ultimately, you had to get down to editing Friedman's script. And I don't know how long it's been since you've looked at it, but like we were saying, it's apparent why a lot of the decisions that were made to help craft it were there. But I'm just curious about the politics of that, and as historians, like, what are the politics of editing a script like that? From I don't know if there was tension between you as writers, or if you've got this old school guy and this young upstart, an established guy versus a new guy. Is there any kind of politics to it, or things you have to watch out, or is everybody just doing a job and they get it?
There was a ton of politics to it. There were a lot of layers of politics to it, but I'll start with today and I'll work my way.
That was
back.
a lot of stuff to build to that question.
Ron Friedman was this mysterious character to us. He was not on staff at Sunbow. He was a guy who had been contracted really early on to write the G.I. Joe pilot, and he did a brilliant job with it. And contracted to write the Transformer movie. Oddly enough, George Arthur Bloom did the Transformer pilot, the first 5 episode version of Transformers, and Ron was really not a Transformer guy. I mean, it was just that welcome to Sunbow,
right.
and what happened was, whatever Ron's first draft is, I wish I could say 5 things simultaneously and they'd all carry equal weight. One, bear in mind, Ron, you probably started out with a laundry list of here's the whole new line of characters.
Right.
Okay. Here we got these triple changers. I mean, you got Springer, who, the joke in the book is he's that turns into a what? That turns into all of a sudden, Transformers were these weird outer space things, and they were triple changers, and they did not look like semi trucks and Walther PPKs. Okay. So Ron probably was writing a script from just a pile of notes from Joe, probably Tom, probably Jay, probably Hasbro, maybe even Nelson at that point.
Mm-hmm.
The origins of how the first draft were written are totally opaque to me. I vaguely would hear, somewhere off in the chatter, I hear, "Oh, it's a Transformer movie," and like I didn't really believe there's a Transformer movie out there. I just didn't believe it was ever going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, we were moved to working so fast and so hard that anything that wasn't directly in my path, I didn't care about. I was still doing G.I. Joe. I'm doing Transformers. I'm, hanging out with Wally Burr and arguing with, people about doing the Boo Boo babies. And so I didn't really, all this was just chaff, happening somewhere, fireworks going off in 3 towns over. That's, okay. One day Jay shows up with Ron Friedman's first draft and says, okay, we got to go to work on this. Literally shows up. I mean, he comes to Westwood. And, I think, the Sunbow always put people up in hotels, but for that week, he was living in my apartment on my couch. I read it, and okay, let's get to Ron Friedman. Ron Friedman was, and his script was a warehouse of some of the most striking and stunning visuals ever written anywhere by anybody. Maybe there was a story in there. I didn't see it, but, I got
sure.
It was something Joe had kind of dictated, and Ron was trying to follow what it was that he was talking about. Ron delivered like the perfect first draft.
Mm-hmm.
He did not deliver a shootable movie, and I'm not sure that was his challenge. Okay,
Right.
No writer does that, and you have to get you have to just sort of get deep into writer world and writer psyche to understand what a first draft in that universe was at that time, and it was really just something where you lay out this smorgasbord.
And is the idea to push it so that you actually get creativity on the page and then figure out how you carve it back?
Yeah, and I have no idea whether the script you've seen was really his first draft. I mean, I've seen things that were supposed to be his first draft.
We think it might be a second draft. I can't remember what the date is, but because I think nobody has seen the first draft allegedly, other than maybe you.
The draft we read though is, I mean, it's definitely looks like it's descriptive of stuff out of like heavy metal. It would be hard to recreate in an animated
pretty wild
series for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, but
it's still badass.
It was incredibly badass, and probably what you've seen was okay. So then the politics and all that. Jay and I sit down and write.
That's your politics alarm going off.
Alarm. He's going to miss his brunch. So Ron, so whatever the thing going around's first draft, I suspect it was like one of many steps that would follow. There is Jay and I sit down and write The Secret of Cybertron. And I'm absolutely convinced, and I think for 2 minutes Jay was too, that this was the best script ever written by anybody for any reason.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, you have to, we wrote it in a week. And what's really funny is a lot of it has ended up in the movie, in fact, and resurfaced later on in the series.
Sure.
And it probably that draft was the thing, because that was where I was actually concerned about trying to figure out how the mythology worked, how this all worked, how that was my winky. Is I just
going
wanted
deep.
It was a cross between D&D and being an ancient history major and just saying, hey, why don't we just do this like the ancient gods or something, and let's figure out who created these guys and why. And I didn't much care. There were multiple different explanations for how the Transformers were created. The Bible has the real Bible has like 2 different origin stories back to back. That's okay. But I did want some kind of explanation, because that gives you something to pivot to, and it grounds everything and tries to make it make sense. And I was probably the most anal from that point of view of anybody around,
right?
And so we did something that basically was, kind of King Arthur with the charge of the Light Brigade, where like in one charge into the center of Cybertron, like the entire 84 product,
mow them down.
Yes. Yes.
It was rough. It was not something that probably ever should have been made, but it seemed like a great idea in winter of 1985 or whenever all this happened. Spring.
You got to push with that first draft.
It was but what it did is it solved a lot of the Ron problems. I mean, never again did it not make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
However, with every draft you get something, you lose something. You lost a lot of the wildness of Ron. However, when you look at now just the sheer beauty of Nelson's, animation, I mean, stuff like when they're inside of Unicron, I don't think that would have existed without Ron's really frenetic writing and the edge he put on it, because that wouldn't have come out of me. And a certain amount of that's obviously Nelson, who is just really a genius with color. I mean, sometimes I know you guys, probably seen that movie, all you ever want to see it. But if sometimes you just look at the use of color in that movie. I remember one time I was watching it, and it just struck me as it's like an art film. I mean, to me, to this day, when I watch that film, it's something different every time I see it. They screened it
completely.
at the Cinegrill one time.
I mean, when we talk about Ron's script being quote unquote psychedelic, that's what you see on screen. A lot of those internals of Unicron and some of the alien Quintessa and things like that. I mean,
and like you were saying, some of the lighting in particular, like you say in the book, and I totally get it whenever I see this on screen. I couldn't crystallize it before, but like Nelson Shin was a genius with light and storytelling.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, one weird kind of aside on the Transformer movie is even me, every time I see it, it's a different movie. I mean, I see it one time at the Cinegrill in Hollywood, which is basically a bar that's all where they show movies. But I mean, it's like really well done. It may not be there anymore. But I was struck by the 80s-ness of it. All of it, the whole movie was just the soundtrack and Vince DiCola and Stan Bush and the Touch and Eric Idle and Weird Al, and I'm all of a sudden it was 1986 in my life.
Caleb, you compare it to heavy metal sometimes, but honestly, it's what heavy metal wanted to be. It's better. Yep. It delivers on that promise more than that movie does.
Another time I watched it, and it was like I was watching some weird art film, and I was just, all I was seeing was the colors. I wasn't even listening to dialogue or anything else. Then the weirdest time I watched it was at some con. I think it was TF Con in Toronto, but it was one. I think it was a TF Con, and the sound broke. Okay, the speaker stopped working, and the audience all knew the script. Okay, I couldn't do that. Not even close. I may have read it. I don't remember it. I mean, it's this very different position to be in as a writer. But like, we just left the sound off, and they're saying all the lines, and then they're humming the stings. And I'm thinking, my God, this really did have an impact on people. And there were like 500 people in the room. I mean, it was just an experience. The closest thing you get to it maybe is being some rock star and and like the band sing along,
doing your lyrics,
singing along with your song or something. It was a really amazing experience. So back to the politics. So anyway, Jay and I do our draft. Joe and Tom did not share our overwhelming enthusiasm for the project. They liked a lot of it, and they understood why we'd done what we'd done and all that. And so, and Joe was trying to explain to me the Unicron idea. And Unicron, somewhere after our version of it was The Secret of Cybertron, which the holy grail I could find would be that script somewhere, because there never existed probably more than 10 copies of it. And nobody has one. And if there is one, it's somewhere in a closet behind me. However, look what I did find. I did find the first two scripts for what would have been season 2 of Inhumanoids.
So you do have treasures in there.
That's what I'm saying. You find some really cool stuff. Found a novel I forgot writing. I mean, it was there's just weird stuff in storage, And I mean, I'm wondering, like, I have these broken Megatron. It's like, I wonder if I could frame that and like sell it as this is the broken Megatron that was actually on the Transformer movie writer's desk. What it lacks in pristineness, it makes up for it provenance.
Its authenticity is unquestionable.
It's really busted up, Walter PPK. So then we went into this period where we had Joe, who I think had sort of knew he could not buy into. Nobody could wrap their head around the idea that Cybertron was in fact a robot. My theory was Cybertron was basically Unicron's brother.
Right.
Space rock and dust and crap had gotten on it over the years. But if you took the Autobot Matrix, stuck it in the center there of Cybertron, it would unlock Cybertron, and Cybertron would fight Unicron.
Right.
That was the movie, was this massive battle between two planet-sized Transformers.
And the Marvel comic took elements of that, and I know in other iterations of Transformers, Cybertron ultimately did turn into a robot. So the ideas lived in some way or another.
Idea was there, the idea leaked out, and ultimately to this day, I believe the idea is irresistible. But anyway, that's just my opinion. All right, so Joe's not buying this. and he's explaining Cybertron to me, and we have what was I remember is like the 48-hour long meeting in the office. I'm saying in the book, all I remember is lying on my back, smoking cigarettes, being just a complete prima donna. By the time we were done with my prima donna weekend, we had a pretty good idea what the movie was going to be, and that it was God knows how many drafts after that, and that's why it's something you see on the internet. Could be any one of those. There were times we put a bunch of Ron stuff back in just to sort of test ride it. We'd take it out. We'd put Secret of Cybertron stuff in there, take it out. We write whole new scenes, but slowly. And then summer of 1985, I went out to New York for like 6 weeks. And that pretty much what came out of that was the final draft of the script. At one point, and here's the other political weird thing. And maybe he has a copy somewhere, but Nelson and I think Jerry Moeller, but I could be wrong about that, wrote a draft of the script. At that point, nobody wanted. There's nothing wrong probably with Nelson's draft. I never saw it. Joe and Tom said no. The Nelson sent some note like not one word. and it was just there comes a point where you just don't want to hear new ideas. You have to execute on what you
got to move forward at a certain point.
There's one real quick, just like last thing about your script, The Secret of Cybertron. In that memo we talked about, this one that you sent to writers, explaining.
Probably, yeah.
You have like 12 different potential script ideas for maybe writers would want to do, and the number 8 is Journey to the Center of Cybertron. The Autobots and Decepticons have fought their way to the center of their own planet through a maze of primitive monsters and try to find the original program, the machine that made them all. And then in parentheses you wrote, typing this has kind of made me like it. I might write this one.
Maybe I should. That would be a fun one to do, like for some comic or something. I mean, Chris Metzen and Livio Ramondelli and I did a series of comics like 5 years ago. I mean, pretty recently. If I ever do another comic, maybe I'll do that one. Yeah, I mean, I just because bear in mind at that exact same moment, I'm doing Inhumanoids, and so I'm thinking, hey, if I go to the center of Earth, I might as well go to the center of Cybertron. It's like I thought this is all one massive shared world. Now nobody else did, and I wasn't supposed to think it that way, but. I mean, you're doing G.I. Joe, Humanoids, Transformers, somewhere along the line, Muscle Machines, and later Visionaries. I mean, you have a lot of ideas rolling around your head, and the compartments in your brain aren't that isolated, aren't that discrete. Pretty much that was it. There were all the summer drafts, summer '85 out in New York, and then after that we tuned it for various different technical reasons while we were recording the actors. That was really it.
I've seen you and Ron on panels together in LA. I saw you guys have done some YouTube things as well.
I've gotten to know Ron really in the last year and a half. Actually, I ran into him because he was always, I guess that's the one interesting political thing is he was always this kind of outside guy. We didn't really know what he did and what he came to do. And it's like he's writing the Transformer movie, but it's like whatever. And so I wouldn't describe it as an antagonistic relationship, but it was just an alien relationship. We'd see him at Christmas parties or something. That was
right.
We knew of him. Then I ran into him at a convention in Burbank. I can't remember what it was called, but
it might have been last year. Is that possible? Or
yes.
Okay.
And we started talking. I realized this is a great guy. And then I read his book. He wrote a book called I Killed Optimus Prime.
We got it.
I mean, you want to see the similarities and differences between Ron Friedman and myself. Just compare our books. That'll tell you everything you know.
Yeah, Aaron actually did an interview with him at that con.
I did.
And got the book.
I had the opportunity to speak to him for about an hour and a half, and he he's a delightful character in a million different ways.
And when we're sitting having lunch, what we're talking about is collaborating on doing the Anabasis of Xenophon as a Transformer story. Okay, that's what we're talking about. We were talking about a lot of ancient stuff and things like that. And I thoroughly enjoy Ron. He's great.
Well, good. That's awesome. Thanks for talking about that. I feel like it can be a sensitive area when egos get involved to a degree. I think the way you described it is interesting. There's no clash. There's just no relationship.
Yeah, in the day there really wasn't. You know what I mean? And once again, you have to think of it from the point of view we were just working at a velocity where there was no time for any of that. I mean, I think Ryan will support me on this, and this may not be a good thing to say because people won't want to read it, but I don't think I say anything bad about anybody in the entire book because I don't remember anything bad. You know, I mean, there was plenty of it, and because I wrote it, I didn't have my journals at the time because I thought that I was at Google for a number of years between there, and the guys at Google were saying, yeah, that period in the mid '80s is what's known as the digital black hole. Because everybody had their stuff on all these weird computers. I was working on digital equipment, computers and or Macs with these 3-inch discs, and people were working on K-Pros and Xeroxes. And so there's no digital repository really until Microsoft Word came out late in the 80s for all that stuff. So I figured I lost all those journals. I hadn't remembered that I printed them out, but so after I finished the book, I actually found the journal that covered a huge chunk of the book. I was doing it all. And I was shocked by how accurate it was. And I think the one scene, I can't remember whether I took the scene out or not, where I probably had it wrong, was a scene. Was there a Magic Castle scene in the book, Ryan?
I don't think so. I don't remember that.
Yeah, I took that one out because I misremembered who was there. And I may have remembered it correctly, but my journal didn't reflect that. So I decided, okay, that's inaccurate. The rest of it, as I said, I had it vetted by people who were there, and the rest of it was shockingly. It's amazing how your memory, once you remember one thing, you begin to be this elaborate wiring diagram of everything being connected together. It's shockingly accurate.
Yeah, and in speaking of like you saying that you didn't say anything negative about anyone in the book, which is totally true, you also make a point of saying that you, as just your personality, tends to not remember negative aspects.
I don't. We all have heinous things that happen to us that obviously we'll never forget. But I mean, they all just get softer in time. You know what I mean? Because why? Some battle you fought and lost 20 years ago is really hardly relevant to, right?
Now I need to reflect on all the bitterness inside me.
Your
figure
manifesto.
out how to figure out how to get over it.
A little bit of amnesia is a pretty good thing.
Yeah. How many episodes of Joe did you write?
I remember writing 3, and once again, only self-defense, because other things have fallen out or were unusable. And that, I think the first, I could be wrong about this. I think the first was a Gamesmaster. The second was Ode Cobra, and the third was Skeletons in the Closet. So those were the 3. I clearly remember writing the Gamesmaster, and it was like very hot in LA. I remember it was just like scorching hot. The script had fallen out. I was trying to finish the books with Gary, and so I'm writing the Pick a Path Adventure books. And when I ran dry on that, then I write the Gamesmaster, and I think it came out in 36 hours. And what's really funny about it is what it really was kind of about is a premonition of the battles over TSR between my sister and Gary Gygax. When I rewatched it, I realized it was written in exactly that era when nothing had happened yet, but I knew it was going to. Subconsciously, consciously, I didn't know it. But I mean, that's what that's.
So that's
about.
Reflected in the stories subconsciously.
Yeah, I don't know who the Game Master is, Lorraine or Gary, but yes, that's
I didn't even. Speaking of segueing off of talking about perceived protagonists and antagonists, and then you mentioned earlier, how you find interest in creating, taking the protagonist and the antagonist and then having them both team up to face a common enemy. I remember the Gamesmaster watching it as a kid, and I always found it an interesting episode because you have those characters out of uniform, off the clock, which was an unusual thing. Seems like you build a certain sympathy for the familiar antagonists, and I find that compelling for a number of reasons. And I'd like to know your thoughts on the motivation to write a sympathetic antagonist and the results or desired effect you have on your audience when you're writing that way.
The big instruction I got from Jay Bacall was, let's just do something different. Let's not blow up the headquarters at the end. Let's just make it different. So I was given wide license. And to some extent, I think I was writing about the world around me. I mean, at that exact moment, I'm driving a red convertible around. Well, Flint's driving a red convertible around. I guess Flint was always this weird alter ego of mine. I mean, if I had a character, for obvious reasons. Joe and Tom said, probably apocryphally, said, hey, you have to take the job. We named a character after you. I don't know that's really true. I think Larry Hama probably did. But they were well aware of me at that point. Who knows? People may have just thought it was a cool name. Anyway, but I like the story. I mean, it was just a period of my life. I'm not married. I'm dating different people, and they tended to be women that were either Lady J or the Baroness, and so that was kind of fun. And it was just fun to think about what are these guys doing on Saturday afternoon at 3:00. When I was in film school, we were reflexive of movies in the 70s, and almost every one of them starts out well into the 80s with the character waking up in the morning. And you define the character by what they do in the morning. And I didn't do exactly that, but it was kind of a question: is what do these characters do on their day off? They must have one. And so you have Lady J's like buying clothes because it's kind of like Lady J's pretty elegant character. I mean, it's not like she's just sitting around camo fatigues on a Saturday afternoons. She's out there getting actual clothes, and she's probably dating Flint, and he's driving around in his sports car having a grand old time. And Cobra Commander, what's he going to do? On his day off, he'll review his troops. I mean, and Destro and the Baroness were probably having some secret affair. We start from, and we had if you think about all those episodes, as different as they are, you still actually get the featured other characters into the story. When they're trying to find Flint, and when the two groups that are looking for the people, then you have their battles. Their extraneous battles, and I can't remember where they were on the Gamesmaster, but I mean, that was to feature the two characters who were supposed to feature in the episode, and then we just got this fun idea of what if we mixed G.I. Joe happens in Candyland, and you have this kind of crazy guy that's got the arc and he's got all these weapons that look really goofy but are extremely lethal, and let's just make it kind of different, because remember too, there's the fundamentally 80s thing where games had taken on a whole meaning they never had before in culture. I mean, we were doing all day every day. I mean, the number of quarters I threw into stand-up machines at 7-Eleven. I mean, it's shocking. And the world was bursting with every time you turn around, there's some new magic item around. The stand-up games and little handheld things you have, but none of it's wired together. It's all unique. There's no internet. You're not doing this on a phone call. I mean, this phone call cost us about $300.
Right.
A different world. But so it was kind of about that. I mean, it was just, probably in some weird Freudian subconscious way, though, to the extent you can do that. That was just kind of my life. I'm living I'm got the office up at D&D, and that's its own kind of fantasy land, and Sunbow's its own fantasy land. And every time we turn around, we're somewhere cool.
The banter in Gamesmaster and Ode to Cobra is also very creative and actually really entertaining. Just the way that you have these relationships set up in those episodes, especially Ode to Cobra, you've got like these. So you got a lot of jealousy, and I just found that really interesting. Even between like the Baroness and Flint, and Destro coming in and being jealous of Baroness and Flint, and I like the episodes that you wrote for, because you're adding some depth to their characters beyond their traditional roles as being soldiers.
Well, I think it was in Ode to Cobra where basically Destro and the Baroness had kind of had enough of being part of Cobra, and they figure out how to get out of the organization. And that to me is an episode I find really interesting in a number of ways. In that just since we're having this whole narcissistic conversation, just in the sense that that once again was just kind of the world I was in at that point. I'm in this world where people have all these relationships and all this weird stuff's happening in the relationships, and in my case, I was almost a decade away from being married, but I mean, it's like most people are getting married, and it's complicated, and you have these weirdly interconnecting groups of people, and people are always talking about we can get out of this and do something else and all that. So that was really just a reflection of the world I was in. And you got Gary in the mansion and all these kind of interesting women that were hanging around there, and
groupies.
Oh man!
Yeah,
I guess I need to read
it's
the book.
It's a whole thing in the book.
Now I'm all in. All of a sudden,
the whole D&D mansion. I had no idea. That was fascinating.
Well, but I mean, it was just it was like staffed by I remember, I mean, one of the most vivid memories I have, because I remember thinking at that moment of, I'm going to be looking back at this 30 years from now and sort of only half believe it happened. I remember, I was out like having a cigarette. I've been working all day, and there are a couple sort of recent vintage, Playboy bunnies bubbling around in the jacuzzi. And I remember thinking, this is going to sound really wild when I tell this story long after. But right now, this is just my life. I mean, I know their names. Hey, how you doing? Oh, okay, I got it. Write 10 more pages. It's like these people that are almost fantasy characters, but like you kind of know the minutia of their lives, and you see them interacting in this environment.
Right.
And that's kind of what it was about. There were just a lot of, you could tell there was a lot of kind of scheming going on, because, perceived wealth and stuff like that. And I think it showed up in the script.
Yeah, the point about character development, it's kind of a boring idea that everybody loves their job every day and they're just going to be focused forever on that one thing. Sometimes people aren't happy with their situation, and why can't two guys in Cobra or G.I. Joe or whatever be like, kind of the Dinobots are never happy with their position.
Yeah.
Like, it's interesting that there's dissent.
And I knew that like eventually Flint and Lady J are going to get married and have Marissa Fairborn. I mean, I already knew that that was in the script. So, you have to kind of set that up. And, this will be kind of the dating story they'll be telling her later on when she's older. And, and it just seemed like a really fun, just different venue, to set a G.I. Joe story, because we got all the stuff in there. There's lots of action and things blow up, and, you go all over the world, and there's a lot of intrigue. But it was like, yeah, let's put some heart in these characters and give them a real life. Mm-hmm. Which, thematically that's there, and it's also there in Skeletons in the Closet. Because you're seeing Lady J's, family home, and and you're finding a, let's be honest, an humanoid sitting in the basement, but it's kind of a version of an humanoid. In the basement, you got secret societies, because I was writing Agent 13 at that point, so I had to get secret societies in there. I remember being kind of amazed by when I saw the artwork for what they drew. I was thinking, that's not what I had in mind, but it really looks cool.
Yeah, because you're not a part of their secret society.
Right. The other thing too is, whenever possible, I got Larry Houston to do storyboards, because Larry Houston had this unique capability to, I mean, my writing style is pretty sparse, but he could like secretly read into my brain all the stuff that I didn't put on the page and make it better. And so, I think he did all three of those storyboards.
You've got another aspect of that is we discovered that Destro is a relative of Lady J.
Yes.
And again, there's some commonalities there that kind of put them together, or put Cobra and G.I. Joe together in the same boat. You're talking about very much writing in that time in the 80s, and obviously your writing reflects that on a personal level. Do you have any thoughts on did the Cold War at the time, militarily speaking, and then relationship speaking, between the United States and the Soviet Union, do you think that informed your approach to your writing at all, as far as the dynamic between?
I mean, you can't, that is a product of the Reagan era. It just is. And the Cold War had taken on a very different aspect by that point, in that,
right,
I think subconsciously we knew we were winning it.
Yeah.
About the time Star Wars Defense came in, and basically Reagan just they pulled off the biggest psyop in history. He just said, okay, I'm gonna start spending money. You're gonna start spending money. We'll see. We're still here at the end of the game.
Right. Yeah.
Where that was gonna go.
We outspent them.
The fear was the Soviet Union gonna implode or explode. Unfortunately, imploded. But I don't think we didn't see the Berlin Wall coming down. I mean, there's no way you can overstate what a shocking development that was. And that was later. But you sort of knew we were winning it. We were in a different phase. In many ways, that time was about as opposite of this time as you could possibly be. There's partisan stuff, but it was minor. The world was clear. You had the monoverse was still intact, and that all the news networks pretty much played it down the center, and there was a shared vision of what was important in the world and what wasn't. We don't have. I don't want to drift off into some weird political track, but I mean what I'm getting to is, it was a very unified period, and so you could have a criminal. I mean, I viewed Cobra as basically being like Spectre. If you really built out all of Spectre, it would be Cobra, and with a much heavier military edge. But nevertheless, that's basically what they were. It was a world where there were two powers and
Yeah.
that was it.
Okay.
The
Go ahead,
other, Caleb, I think this is an insight you brought to a conversation we had offline around all of the Dille Joe episodes, and as I'm thinking about it, even Prime Target, all of them take the characters off the game board that they usually play on and put them on a different game board, which is an interesting concept. And I'm just connecting all these threads back to, gaming was your primary passion and how you, whether consciously or subconsciously, drew on that to create your scripts.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's what I was thinking. That was I was doing. It literally, I tend to approach, writing from world out. I mean, and there are different kinds of writers, right? There are writers who, see a story and the story is about the characters. You know what I mean? And they, and the entire process is about correctly telling the story they see in their heads. I just see a world and just say, what can I do with that world? How can I mess around with that world? How can I change a couple rules? Okay, change a rule and say, what do these guys do in their time off? Change a rule and say, what are the personal relationships between these characters? Change a rule under what circumstances will Joe and Cobra effectively be on the same side? Mm-hmm. How do we put all these guys in it? Because, also too, I think Steve and I tended to view Joe as kind of like James Bond. So we wanted a situation where the good guys and the bad guys are in the same room talking to each other, and one of them doesn't necessarily have to have a gun on the other one. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? You got to, how do they meet? They exist in the same world. Not everything is a hot battle. That was probably, you're absolutely right. It was game boards. I hadn't really thought about that. But yeah, it was always to move them to somewhere else. I mean, Cobra, you could argue Cobra and Gamesmaster and Skeletons in the Closet are in fact dungeon crawls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
You can make that argument. I had never thought of that until this moment, but that's correct.
Go ahead. Oh, I was just going to ask Caleb if he had any other Joe-specific questions. I had one more, like, Transformers-specific one that was from your book, Flint. So I didn't want to talk about too many of the specific stories you tell in the book, because the journey that I went on to discovering it and, like...
into buying the book, right? That's the goal.
Yes, exactly. So you don't want to give the whole store away.
Leave a little, just a tease.
Because, the discovery was so much fun. But there is one I wanted to touch on, which was the Voltronic Galaxer.
Yeah, that got its whole section. That's like my editor was saying, "Do we really need this?" And I said, "Yeah, it's."
I found that. I didn't know about that actually, and it's from the Blaster Blues episode. I was just wondering if you could tell us the story behind that and why it was kind of a turning point.
Well, yeah, I mean, and I go into it in great detail in the book, and I'm not sure how much I can remember of it now. When you finish a book, you're kind of done with it. You develop this kind of amnesia. But so if I'm repetitive, no, I mean that was a little. I remember being on the phone one day with Jay, and we'd talk for probably a couple hours every day, and we're going through a script, and Jay says, "Oh, the Voltronic Galaxer," and we just stopped. Okay, it just kind of stopped, and we made a couple of jokes about Voltronic Galaxatives and stuff like that. But what the Voltronic Galaxer was it was that moment when we crossed this line into, that's the kind of thing that would have been in one of the Ruby Spears shows I did a few years earlier. It would have been in a different show. There was nothing really wrong with it. The person who created the Voltronic Galaxer, I don't even know who it was or why, and was doing, the right thing. But we had just come to a point ourselves where we felt we put too much into this to have a Voltronic Galaxer, meaning that, just to have some bogus plot device that solves all of our problems. I mean, it gets into, it sort of ties into this whole Perceptor story where, I tell this story still in the book where Jay and I it's like a Friday afternoon and we're just too fried to get the thing, get all the way through, solve every problem in the script. And we had this act out, which was, thank heavens you projected a hologram, and they, Jeopardy is they're about to burn up in a planet, but then we find out in the act in that it's a hologram, and that just, and so we said, okay, we got to fix this. And, so I just put in the line temporarily, thank heavens for that bogus plot device, or we'd really be in trouble right now. Okay, well, we never get back to the script. Cut to 3 months later, I'm sitting there in the recording session. One of the actors reads the line, thank heavens for that bogus plot device that, or I really said, I think Wally kept it off, saved it. And I had to obviously put in a different line, when we were recording. But I mean, and the Voltronic Galaxer was part of that. And so I go into this long riff in the book about what you learn from about the time you find a Voltronic Galaxer in your work, and how you deal with it. Looking at it from pretty much every side I can look at it is, okay, if I had to make a Voltronic Galaxer work, how would I make it work? What does it say about your story that you have a Voltronic Galaxer in it? It's and I'm picking on on the Voltronic Galaxer, but what it really was just this moment, and it may have been the moment. It may have been a moment where we made a misstep, because the fundamental truth is we were doing the show for kids, and we knew, as I say in the book, we were doing it for like fathers because there was a recession going on, who were all out of work. But we had advanced to a point where we didn't want to have one more stupid thing in there. And that would, and also at that point, we're probably knee deep in the movie and we're taking ourselves pretty seriously. And we know that season 3, it's going to be really different, because season 3 is a science fiction show, because the toys we're selling would not make sense on Earth.
Right.
I don't know if consciously or subconsciously we knew that, but we knew that. And so there was this kind of moment of, okay, Voltronic Galaxer is where we were when this started. Maybe in one of the earliest episodes, that would have been totally, but that's not where we're going now. It was that moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's a moment where you fundamentally, it's probably, if you're a band, it's the moment the Beatles are sitting there saying, hey, we can't sing, She Loves You Part 2, on this album. I got this idea about a Sgt. Pepper band and, and all that, and you're just going a different direction.
Yeah, exploring new concepts. And something just hit me. I don't remember. I'm sure the tagline was always robots in disguise, but starting the movie and certainly into season 3, they're not really in disguise anymore. They still transform, but they're whatever they want to be or whatever they are. They're not hidden to the world.
So you could argue that they're in disguise for outer space, but it was very hard to take most of those toys and make them mean anything on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time you have Hot Rod looking the way Hot Rod looked, that's a far cry from Bumblebee looking like a VW Bug. And there are 10,000 of them on the road. I mean, Hot Rod, oh boy, nobody's going to see that. Nobody's going to notice that. It just didn't make sense to us.
Yeah, even if you don't see him turn into a robot, you're seeing the craziest car you've ever seen in your life.
You're not going to notice. That's exactly what I call a real, I guess it's hiding in plain sight, but or if you were a character deployed to a lot of, car shows or something, maybe that would work. But I don't think anybody consciously did it, and it started with the toys. I mean, when we saw the toy designs, we realized, because that dictates what the shows are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
And with the toy design, I mean, if the 86 product line 86 product line had all been stuff that looked like objects on Earth, then the show would have been taking place on Earth. But they didn't fit there. And after the movie, you couldn't really go back to Earth. We'd had enough deserts.
Right.
Yeah.
That was the moment when, all the comic book guys, who their concern, if my concern was interesting, environments and dungeons, their concern was, chronologies and continuities and stuff like that. And the, season 3 is when all of that came together, for good or for bad. And now, if I had a fantasy, one unfinished piece of business with Transformers I'd like to do, I would like to go back and get Five Faces of Darkness properly animated with all the scenes that are supposed to be in there that we never got, that stuff like that, just get that properly done, because that's really a sequel to the movie.
Along a similar note, we have a couple friends that produce it's a script. It's called Transformers Reanimated. And so shout out to Yoshi and Greg, by the way. Basically, they create these scripts to try and fill in gaps between what happened in season 2 in the movie. Hey, a lot of stuff happened between Optimus Prime being cloned and trying to keep people from walking into exploding crystals, and Unicron showing up on the scene and trying to destroy everything. So they're trying to fill in those gaps.
I love stuff like that, because it is a big mystery. 20 years fall off the calendar.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing we really know that happens is Marissa Fairborn's born. There's almost no explanation of that dark period. I think a lot of interesting things happen in that period.
We know Cobra Commander stayed alive because we saw him in 2006 at some point or another.
Yeah, Cobra Commander stayed alive because you saw him in season 3, Flint and was like older, but he was still around. In the Killing Jar. Yeah, I mean, you saw a lot of you saw stuff that that gave you hints. I love stuff like that where you try to fill in the holes between the two, and the things that where'd RC come from? I mean, I've always imagined that there was a planet like Amazon, transforming females. Because I always thought it was weird that like everybody was a guy in there except RC. I mean, that was the reality of the products, and so you like to have the Amazons go rampaging, so kind of like Wonder Woman of Transformers, because RC's probably just one of them.
Well, that concept kind of came to life in the IDW universe. You had all these other Transformers civilizations that had split off, and one of those civilizations was a badass female civilization.
Yeah, I would love to see that. I mean, because what you can do is by the time you get to the movie, they're pretty familiar with being in space. I mean, obviously, they come from Cybertron, and if we ignore Teletran 1, I mean, and assume that the Earth wasn't the only, I mean, you assume that the stories we've seen are just the Transformer stories that involve people on Earth, right?
Right.
We get hints of it. Do we ever see the Shrike Bats Andromedon? Do we ever see,
right.
stuff Cup refers to? I mean, you can have a series of Cup adventures. I mean, what was Cup as a young guy? I mean,
that would be cool.
Stories.
Hang on, I'm copywriting that right now. Trade the
product you don't
Autopod
own
Decepticast
and licensing you don't have.
It's kind of like Sherlock Holmes story. They talk about the giant rat of Sumatra. Okay, in some story, Conan Doyle never told us that story, but assumingly that'd be a great story. You could tell the giant rat of Sumatra.
That's what I love season 3 personally. It broadens the universe in that way. It expands it in that way that only makes sense for a race of beings who were spacefaring.
The mausoleum existed far before season 3. Right. By the time in Dark Awakening, by the time they get there, so that was out there. Who built it and for what reason, and who else is in there, and how many stories are contained in that.
Right.
And they seemingly forgot it was there because they seem surprised when they come upon it.
Well, that may have been forgotten knowledge, or they may have been unaware of it. But you got to ask, what was Ultra Magnus doing all that time? We never saw him on Earth. He wasn't sitting in season 2. He's well known to everybody by season 3. What's his story?
He has to be some kind of legendary figure. Why?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Well, and you could easily go back and fill in. Well, there's very good reason Ultra Magnus was. I mean, he went out and did things that just have never been recorded in this continuity. I think that's just great because you explain. I mean, you start at the movie and then you use season 3 as kind of like a hint book for what happened, and you go back. Engineer it backwards. I mean, it didn't seem like when there were a bunch of Skuxoids sitting around there, it didn't seem like that was anything they'd never encountered before.
Right. We could talk about Transformers forever. I'd love to transition a little bit. I did make a joke at the top of the interview about the Precious Moments. I'm bringing it up because it's a link. The corporation of Precious Moments is actually housed where we are in the heart of the Ozarks of Missouri.
Anything for Precious Moments. Buzz did.
Well, you were credited for it, so maybe you didn't write for it. Were you involved in any sort of executive production sense? Hey, if you're saying no, I'm going to go with you over IMDb.
It's a traumatic thing that I have PTSD and can't remember. I remember the name Precious Moments.
You know what we're talking about when we talk about Precious Moments? Those little cutesy religious cards and figurines, illustrations. Big deal in the 80s if you were an evangelical type.
And what am I credited on?
It's an animated, not a series. I think it was like an animated one-shot thing, like a Precious Moments Christmas special is what it was.
Did I write it with someone else?
I'd have to dive into the
Why
IMDb.
did you bring this up?
Because if he remembered it, it's a funny footnote. But since he doesn't remember it now, it's just an awkward transition.
Right, I'll tell you, he's actually read the book. I talk about a lot of embarrassing stuff in there. I mean, that would be far from the most embarrassing thing. And give me some more stuff because the name is familiar, and there was a lot of stuff I did that, frankly, I kind of forgot about. I mean, I wrote a thing called Dark Water. It was after this whole period, and I didn't remember. I'm walking through Toy Fair and I'm hearing this song. I'm saying, "Boy, this sounds really familiar." The words, and I realized I'd written it. That was the pilot for Dark Water, But I just one of those very fast, that. Like Transformers and Joe were like long, deep experiences. There are the other things you're right that's really fast and you forget ever having done it. But anyway, yes. So
you were a story consultant, which maybe means you showed up that day.
Said something to someone in passing.
Timmy's Special Delivery, directed by Rick Reiner, written by Debbie Butcher and John Butcher, and let's see, 2 more credits. Buzz Dixon. Sam Butcher, John Butcher, Debbie Butcher.
My guess would be this, because Buzz and I are both pretty Christian, but my guess would be this is I came in there and I said, I can't do it, but Buzz can. And I'll stick around as a consultant, and Buzz wrote it.
Susan Blue was apparently involved as a voice director.
Yeah.
That's one of those things that, for me was a couple meetings and breaking a story, and for Buzz.
Got you a credit.
Probably in a weird way, it's kind of like Prime Target. Mm-hmm. And Buzz was always the guy I knew I could go to. Buzz, Rick Merwin were guys I knew I could go to, who would just do something very quickly that would be correct.
Are sometimes credits just technicalities?
No, I mean, you get to this really weird philosophical issue, and this can get boring fast, but that is, if I came in there and sort of steered it in the right direction and spent 4 days doing it, that's a legitimate contribution. That's exactly what a consultant contribution is. Sometimes it's a creator contribution. Mm-hmm. I've been involved in many projects where people have done less, got credited with more.
Gotcha. Well, you did something. you showed up at some point.
And Nancy Butcher, the names are all familiar, but my guess is it's something somebody approached me with. I like the people. I get what year is that? 1993.
It was a TV short, apparently.
Yeah. Okay. So that's much later, much after this period. In 93, I was still writing movies at that point, and I was just starting to write like real live, AAA title games.
Ryan's our editor. I had to give him something to cut out of this.
Yeah, no, that was riveting. You brought up precious moments there.
Okay.
I find it kind of fascinating because I just had amnesia for it, but
sure.
The names and the context, it's starting to come back. It was a precious moment.
Yeah, hopefully, maybe you can rediscover it. Maybe you'll start a collection of your own. I'm going to move on because I can feel the hate coming from my left. Here's something I know you'll probably have more to say about. 3 things that I want to see if you can figure out the link. Christian Leaders for Responsible Television, Muppet Babies, and cartoon legend Art Spiegelman.
Yes, Garbage Pail Kids. Okay, yeah, okay. All right, now if I have like something that I could hit the erase button and it didn't happen in my life, that would be, as Ryan can tell you, that's high on the list. It was not a long story, but it was an ugly one. It was just something that didn't work, but it prepped for what would come.
I mean, I was familiar with the property Garbage Pail. I mean, we all traded them as kids. The artwork was fantastic, but the show apparently never aired, or in the United States.
Sorry, I had to get some nicotine gum.
I thought you were going to grab a stack of Garbage Pail Kids.
Somewhere I do have a untorn apart sheet of Garbage Pail Kid originals. That's kind of thing. If I ever have some off, like that would not, I get to put like a certain amount of geek stuff in my office, but not much. But my wife saw that, and that's screw it.
Did you collaborate with Art Spiegelman? I didn't know obviously who he was at the time, but
I did not know Art Spiegelman had anything to do with Garbage Pail Kids. Garbage Pail Kids rolled into my life as it was evident. You were in season 3. We're at the end of Sunbow, and it's evident to everybody involved. There are very few shows being bought. It's over. And a guy named Michael Chase Walker, who you can still find on my Facebook page, called me up and said, "Hey, would you develop this? We have a show." He wouldn't tell me what it was, and I knew he was really close with the Bond people, so I thought it was going to be James Bond. Turned out to be Garbage Pail Kids. Yeah, and that was like, but there's still something kind of cool about Garbage Pail Kids, because I just looked at Garbage Pail Kids and said, okay, we're doing Mad Magazine. This is Mad Magazine from when I was a kid. Because, I mean, instinctually what I knew is these are not half-hour characters. I mean, a half-hour character, you can do Joe and Transformers and all that. And they're because they're like real people, and you can have relationships between them, and you can have stuff happen. Garbage Pail Kid is a gag and then get out of there. Okay, I'm not going to worry about what's going to happen with the Garbage Pail Kid because there's no reality attached to them. They're like cartoon. That's why, Bugs and Daffy and all that, those are 7-minute characters. I would later discover all this when I was doing Tiny Toons, but I wrote that when it was a movie before the show. But I thought, yeah, we can do that. It can be, just this, fast gags and Michael Chase Walker was also the guy who did Pee-wee's Playhouse. So what I knew is I was on a good ride as far as he would let me do stuff nobody had on Saturday morning, and that was the only purpose for having me there. So I set off on that. I was still technically at Sunbow. I was probably finishing up some season 3 Transformer stuff, and I would write Visionaries at exactly the same time because Visionaries stretched out after the Sunbow offices were closed. Mm-hmm. So those two projects went on at the exact same moment. And if things started out really good with CBS, because Garbage Pail Kids, and think of the implications of this, was a CBS in-house production, meaning they didn't go out to another production company. They didn't go out to Southern Star or to Hanna-Barbera or to Ruby Spark. They were jobbing the animation out to somebody. But, there was an actual producer. There was a whole overhead. And the studio executive in charge of children's television was the executive producer of the show. Okay, what has to happen for a show produced by the network itself not to be aired? Just think of the implications of that.
Mm-hmm. The brand was a hot button, probably as a sort of anti-establishment. Your kids are going to be weirdos or gross or violent or whatever if you interact with this.
Yeah, I mean, it came out of a really unsinister place, and that is it came out of Cabbage Patch Kids. Mm-hmm. And those things were just so kind of precious and sanctimonious that Art Spiegelman said, hey, let's do Garbage Pail Kids, mm-hmm. And these are these defective jokes. Mm-hmm. But you can see the window between when that property was created, and it was very much, I looked at it, it looked like Mad Magazine because it was Spiegelman, and mm-hmm. That's how I perceived it. But the culture had changed enough in a very tiny window between when, hey, it's a good idea to do that because it was a massive selling, huge phenomenon, mm-hmm. Pack of trading cards, to this is unacceptable and the pressure groups are going to kill us. But bear in mind, the person who greenlit that project and started it was the exact person at the network who was enforcing most restrictions on everything else. And it is also very possible that what the network thought was, oh my God, we're getting killed by these syndicated shows. We've got to do things more like syndicated shows and make things more edgy. And we were successful with Pee-wee, which, by its very nature, Pee-wee is a pretty subversive character. Mm-hmm. Okay? So we got away with that. Let's go try Garbage Pail Kids. I totally understand all of the calculus all the way around it. Mm-hmm. It's one of those situations where all the math adds up, but you come to the wrong conclusion.
Right.
There's this floating X factor called time and culture.
And it just it didn't sync up. It didn't sync up. But by the time you got to a place where you could put it out there, the culture was over it.
The culture was over it, and Saturday morning wasn't what it used to be. I think it had already started being cut back. Just like everything. We weren't doing our shows anymore. The culture, it's really funny. It opened up this fissure. We did all this stuff in this fissure, and then the fissure closed up. It stuck around in the form of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. But think about what that was.
I don't think of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles as not wholesome, though, if that plays into it.
Okay, but think about what the sub, you were talking about politics. Okay, here's how politics works in that. Is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out as a black and white comic book.
Sure.
Remember, Steve Gerber was sitting there reading Comic Buyer's Guide one month. I'm just sitting in the room. He's just like sitting there reading. He starts laughing insanely about it because what he got was all the inside comics jokes that I only vaguely understood. Okay. And that was the funny animals were big at that moment. Frank Miller's, ninja stuff was big at that moment. And Marv, you think of the connections, by the way, back to, the Gamesmaster, and Marv had done Teen Titans and really overhauled Teen Titans. Mm-hmm. And so Steve Gerber immediately looked at it and said, they just took the biggest trends in comics, rolled them into Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You got a mutant, a ninja, teenagers, mm-hmm. and funny. There we are. Okay. And Steve immediately decoded that. The comic itself was black and white and kind of grim. Mm-hmm. This will get back to Garbage Pail in a second, but it's a really interesting thing that was later, so I don't talk about it in the book. Cut to Toy Fair. and this had to be Toy Fair. I want to say 90, 91, maybe an 89. I can't remember the year. They all blur together. But I see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle strollers walking around Toy Fair.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, people-sized plush dolls walking around, talking to people in Toy Fair. And I remember thinking, this is brilliant, because Mom looks at it and sees a cute animal, and the little boy looks at it and sees a sword.
Mm-hmm.
That's when violence in TV had hit its peak. But who's going to look at Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles named Leonardo and Raphael and Michelangelo and somehow think that's a violent toy?
Right.
Does that make any sense?
No,
totally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you get to have your cake and eat it too.
Totally hard hacked the sensitivities of our culture at that time.
Right. You get to have the fun action thing that's goofy and silly as well, but it doesn't feel subversive for parents.
And Power Rangers turn around
fun.
and do this about 2 years later.
Yeah.
Right. That's I never
Wow.
I never thought of that. That's super
Well,
interesting.
there's no reason you would. It's just I lived in that world and I understood why Garbage Pail would run into a banana peel, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles was the most brilliant toy hack I've ever seen in my life.
Right.
And it coming out of this 3 people read it, a black and white comic book. And you got the impression the guys that created it, to different extents with the two of them, never really got why it worked. Because what became famous at Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had nothing to do with what they'd created. They created a parody.
I mean that's the idea of marketing and innovation in general is about being able to understand culture and figure out how to flip it appropriately into something that it scales.
I used to know that, but whoever that was, he had a moment of just transcendent genius. I mean, it was the absolute perfect way to respond to its times. And that happens. That's really rare. I mean, Joe and Transformers was cool because it was just the kind of toy nobody'd ever seen before. It hit the cultural seam. Remember, it was preceded by a show we did at Ruby Spears I had nothing to do with it, called Rubik's Cube. And puzzles were a big toy. So boys' toys were action figures, puzzles, and puzzles when were not just boys, and vehicles. Transformer is an action figure, a vehicle, and a puzzle all in one.
Mm-hmm.
That is just hitting your seam perfectly, because I talk about it in the book, but that's that moment in the 80s, so the first time in human history when kids were totally competent at skills adults needed. They could do things.
Yeah, well, like you said, and you mentioned this in the book, like that was the digital revolution where computers were just becoming like ubiquitous, and the kids for the first time were more tech savvy than their parents.
Exactly. That was a shocking cultural moment.
There's a lot of information in your book that basically deals with the process of writing, and you even couch the book in terms of the hero's journey. I was just wondering if you had any advice for writers today looking to make it a career, like TV, animation, game, or be it anything.
Well, yeah. I mean, what's really funny is the only other nonfiction book I've ever written was a book about writing, game design and writing, right? And in a weird way, this is a sequel to it. I mean, that's a really good observation, because what the story is, it is a story of some complete noob that falls out of film school on page 1 and gets hired by Steven Spielberg in the very end of it, kind of an amusing manner that has to do with Garbage Pail Kids. But anyway, and so I mean, I felt I've finished that part of the journey, right? That was the journey. It was 4 years of my life. It's 83 to 87. And there's a lot of advice for writers in the book, because I mean that's really what I'm writing about, is just learning how to survive in a chaotic world of being a writer. It's like, I'm still learning it. It's not like it's some finished work and it's like I know all things there are to know. I'm sitting here in my mid 60s reinventing myself as we speak, but it was very interesting writing that book at this particular moment in my life, just simply because it really made me go back and think about all the things that happen, and just how you have to be doing a whole bunch of different projects simultaneously. You have to be doing your own projects. You do stuff when you're not getting paid, because that leads to, if the project's worth pursuing, you do it. The thing where I'm saying, you're buying a lot of smoke benders and sky hooks and going on a lot of fool's errands and sucker chases, but they're all hard. I mean, it is it is like this quest you're on, and it never stops.
It was very earnest, and I found it heartfelt, and I also I liked that you also, there's various points where you emphasize that life is not a line of just up to the right success, and that there's a lot of troughs and failures that you go through, and that's just part of it.
Oh, there are epic banana peels in that, but every one of those worked out for the best. You know, if I hadn't been sitting there trying to figure out how to reverse engineer John Ford films while I was at Lucasfilm, I probably wouldn't have gotten the desert scenes in Transformers a year later.
Mm-hmm.
After I swore, I'm never going to do a robot again after that moment. Because you just constantly learn from it. And you learn as much from your failures and bad experiences, maybe more than your good ones. Yeah, that the hero's journey thing, though, I have to do a shout out to my editor. Because the first book was, it was all written. The book was mostly written as Facebook posts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And people respond, and then I'd polish it up and all that. And then they ask me more questions. I write something else. And then I realized, I'm well on my way to a book. But I was just kind of experimenting with social media, saying, how far can I get doing a book on social media, on Facebook? So that's where it came out of. But the first draft didn't have a lot of form to it. And my editor, Guy Intachi, said, you need something. Either this has got to just be a bunch of anecdotal stories, and he gave me a bunch of stories some gambler had told about his career being a gambler, and they're all just, they're episodic, or you have to find a frame for it. And the frame was obvious. It's a hero's journey, because the hero's journey actually becomes relevant, because the first time I ever heard of it was in the course of the time when the book is about.
I can't remember the name of it, but is that the monastery table behind you? That's your desk?
That is the refectory table right
That's
here.
it.
Yes. Man, are you observant? Okay, this refectory table, which is now my son's desk, figures prominently. It was my first good moment in my writing career. As a matter of fact, this exact table, also the table I wrote the book on. I now moved over to my other big desk. My son and I switched desks.
The last thing I had a note on was that the three of us, went and did a panel at TFCon Chicago in 2018, and you were there. Our panel was on Sunday.
On site, not at our panel.
Yeah. You were in the building at some point. We went to the Five Faces of Darkness on Friday, actually, to see that screening.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine you remember this, but on late Saturday night, I ran into you in the hallway of the convention. It was totally deserted, and I told you about our show and a panel, and I was pretty drunk, so I don't know how well I came off. But you took a picture with me and actually sat down and talked to me for like 15 minutes, and I just want to say that was really. Because when meeting someone you admire, it's always dicey, and I just wanted to say that was really nice, and I really appreciated it.
Oh, thanks. I do remember that, because I was there with a high school friend of mine, Mary Pendergast, came out, and because it's always funny when like high school or college friends show up and stuff like this, because like guys from my frat, remember me.
They're outside of the scene.
They're totally outside the scene, and to have them show up like when we did the. And so she's sitting there watching this, it's like, people want to talk to you about some movie you did 35 years. Yeah, they actually do. Yeah, no, I remember that. We were sitting in like the hat check section, or they were using, it'd be coat checks, but it was where they were checking people in and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was like the registration area, and it was deserted. The creepy part about that is that I just heard you on the phone from like when we were in the bathroom, and I came outside and I was like, "Oh, hey, are you Flint Dille?"
So he's basically stalking you from the bathroom,
Not
if I'm
stalking,
understanding this
just
story
coincidence.
correctly.
Coincidence.
This goes both ways. It's really exciting when people come up and care about what you've done. That's there are these little tiny bubbles of the universe where people are really excited about stuff, and then there's the real world where the gardener wants to tell me why you can't fix the plant or something. It's like, so that was great. No, I'm glad I was on good behavior that night.
Since Ryan told that story, I actually spoke to you briefly at TFCon LA. The situation was you were at a table with Buzz Dixon. It was just the two of you, probably having a cocktail or something.
Yeah, we were out in the dining area outside.
Yeah, and I was texting these guys. This is the two legends are right here. I gotta go say something, and I'm not good at necessarily just
cold opens.
Yeah, we're reaching out to notables. So I came up to you guys. I introduced myself. I said I'm gonna interview Ron Friedman tomorrow, and Buzz said, "Well, you'll just have to have Flint or rewrite it later."
Well, Yeah, well, I mean, that was probably pretty much what our attitude was in the day.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? What I knew that Buzz didn't know, because Buzz didn't work on Transformers, is that that Ron's script had a lot of amazing stuff in it. It just was not a producible movie, nor it was first draft. It wasn't intended to be a producible movie. It was intended so that everybody could see their idea, and there'd be 500 more. And it ended up being just all the drafts we did, even the fails, ended up being this Lego set, out of which came the movie and the third season.
But Buzz also had a similar situation with G.I. Joe the movie, in that he is the story consultant, Ron Friedman is the writer, and so you almost lived parallel universes with that experience.
What's funny is they were exactly parallel universes. They just had such wildly different outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like our movie actually made it into the theaters. I remember, we're like heading down to Comic-Con watching it, and it's kind of like this apostrophe, which led to that dinner that's pretty much near the end of the book. That was the end of the whole Sunbow era. But yeah, so Buzz and I were reasonably polite to you when you came by.
Oh, you were both totally polite. I was say hi, give you your space, and move on.
I'm glad you didn't sit down.
Oh no! So look, guys, here, what happened in episode 723? No, it was great. It was a.
If we didn't hear that, we wouldn't be there. You know what I mean?
For sure.
It's like some cosmic accident that we showed up. I mean, what was cool about that particular convention is Doug was there. I mean, getting a hold of Doug is like getting a hold of Dalai Lama. Now, I've talked to him a lot recently, but I probably hadn't talked to him in 10 years before that. Doug was there. Michael Charles Hill was there. I mean, he won't even come on my show. I don't know why, but, I don't think he's mad at me about anything. Ron was there, and it was the first time I really got to know Ron, and I really like Ron. I mean, that was actually a great show. And then all those cosplayers in the Victorian cyberpunk Transformer outfits, that was like, I've never seen that before, but that told me something about the franchise.
Just for me personally, I wanted to say I 100% want to see the adaptation or whatever the Scepter of Seven Souls would be.
Right.
Oh man.
I got to find that. That's around there somewhere. That's what I mean. I've played with those ideas a lot of times since then. Because basically it was, it was sort of my way of addressing what became the GURPS thing. Sorry, this is getting into game geek stuff, but how you translate characters between genres. Because I view all the genres as kind of being, the same, and that you can just transfer heroes from, that's your Hero of 1,000 Faces thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You just change a few props and they're all the same guy, right? Optimus and John Wayne, same guy. They're probably both very similar to Agamemnon. And so Gary and I playing with that thought. And I know that one of the things I meant to do during this COVID period was just clean out the whole closet here and find out everything that I have, because I know some of that stuff's there. It's just, it never.
It doesn't look that disorganized from where I'm sitting.
But there is a storage area behind where it's a bunch of boxes, and it's just like loathsome to go in there and try to pull stuff out, and nobody.
And on you talking about Optimus Prime, is the like the quintessential hero, but I found something interesting that's probably true, where you talk about how had you guys not killed him off, Transformers may not be the beloved property that it is today. Yeah, I mean, I've got like sort of two opposite conflicted thoughts that I can't resolve about that thing. That I totally believe. I believe had we not that killing him off, because we didn't know that. You know what I mean? We thought, Gandalf gets killed in Lord of the Rings, and Obi-Wan gets killed in Star Wars, and Optimus got discontinued, and we got the toy line's got to move on. And I don't think we knew it was going to be a big deal to kill Optimus. We didn't know how big a deal. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people realized how much they cared about him at that point. An entire generation did. And that's no small part of why, Transformers just so overshadows everything else that was like it in the day. And I think that was probably it. So from that perspective, it was a really good thing to do. And it symbolized Transformers. I'm talking like I'm in film school now. Mm-hmm. Kind of symbolized, the transition of the show from, this is a kiddie cartoon, which is pretty much season one, and I was brought in to give it some edge. They said, look, we want you to do for Transformers, because we were at that point duking it out and kind of losing to GoBots. That was when it went to being a comic book octane
franchise, and animation took a big step at that moment. The other side of it is that one of the things I think that was so wonderful about those cartoons, and something I'm working. Chris Metzen and I've been working on a project. We'll see what happens. But he's the guy who created Warcraft and Starcraft and Diablo, and I did a graphic novel series with him. I'm working on an 80s inspired show, and I realized that one of the big things about it was that those shows were really safe. You knew you could come home after school and you're going to see a big adventure with Joe or with Transformers, but nobody's going to die. It's not really going to hurt. Mm-hmm. And we kind of broke that rule in the movie.
Right.
And there's a part of me that actually feels bad about it. And so there are just two, there's a cognitive dissonance in how I feel about it. I think in the end for the franchise, it was a very valuable, good thing to do. I think it was kind of a bad thing in that, it opened a door that you have to be very, you uncork that bottle, you have to be very careful.
So good in the long term, maybe bad in the short term.
Yeah. Well, and now entertainment's gotten to the point where, Game of Thrones is exhausted, kill everybody. The more you
right.
The more you like them, the less I take a life insurance policy out on them. And I think we may have exhausted that, and we want to go back to people actually live through stuff and
sure, take it back to the 80s.
Yeah, back to the 80s.
I almost forgot. I had a quick trivia game. It's called Dille Script or Bullshit. I'm going to give you 4 scripts, and I'm going to test your memory. You're going to tell me if it's a Dille script because you wrote it, or bullshit because I either made it up or you had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, I've already proved that I'd forgotten all about Precious Moments. So, it's actually a better game than you think it is.
The very first one I've got is Fortune Cookie Caper.
That is a Dille script.
Do you recall the show?
Yeah, that was Mr. T. I think the second episode I worked on.
Okay.
Am I credited on that? Or do I have a sole credit on that? Or
I think you are credited. I think you're. I don't have it up in front of me. The whole production.
Because the first few episodes were the Forbidden Monastery. I don't know whether I'm credited on, but I worked on a lot. That was the Refectory table came out of that, and then Fortune Cookie Caper, and then for the biggest break I had in my career ever was the 100-Year-Old Mystery.
Yep.
I'd read somewhere that Jack Kirby contributed to designs on that show. Does that ring any bells?
There's a Jack Kirby story in the book that is a profound moment in my life.
Okay, well, I'll try to not steal
buy the book, everybody.
From that too much. Okay,
Amazon or write to Rare Birds. We can keep the little guys in business.
Okay, how about this one? The Ripening Disaster.
I don't remember the Ripening Disaster. I'm saying that's feces.
You're credited with that on Attack of the Killer Tomatoes.
Oh, man. Oh. Right. Okay. Killer Tomatoes is one of those things I remember doing it. Because I remember, Margaret Lesh, asked me to do it just kind of as a favor because I didn't know what to do with the show, but they'd optioned it. And I went in, and I was writing, I think I was writing Fievel or something later on for Steven at that exact moment. But, Margaret and I went back a long way. And I thought, here's like really just annoying ego. I'd never worked on a Saturday morning show that wasn't number one in its time slot or category. And I thought that's no way that's going to happen with Killer Tomatoes. I'm going to break my record. It's like, I felt like I was Tom Brady and I'm just going into that Super Bowl. and Killer Tomatoes actually debuted number one on its time slot.
Wow.
Okay. All right. I can quit Saturday morning now. I'm done.
What about this one? Bigfoot and the Muscle Machines.
Oh, yeah. I absolutely remember Bigfoot and the Muscle Machines. It is the most obscure, unheralded, nobody ever talks about it, everybody pretends it didn't happen thing in Sunbow history. And certainly in my career at Sunbow, maybe they had something even more disgraceful that I didn't know about. But what was funny about Muscle Machines is I remember that show really fondly. And if you actually go back and watch it, as far as, think about car movies and Smokey and the Bandits and that kind of stuff, there's actually would be something kind of cool. It's like everybody had a James Bond car, except there were these giant muscle machines.
Right.
And Jay Bacall and I actually went to it. They were called tractor pulls, like when, it would be there.
They have, we live in the Ozarks. It's in some small towns around here. It's your Saturday night.
Sure.
Okay, all right. Yeah. When you live in West Los Angeles, you don't see a lot of tractor pulls. some outlying part of Los Angeles to see a tractor pull, but Bigfoot was really famous at that point.
Mm-hmm.
What I remember about it, okay, so it's Jay and I, okay? Jay's like 2 years out of Harvard at this point, right? He's not a real tractor pull kind of guy. And Jay and I go to the tractor pull, and we're sitting in the room with the guys that, the drivers. And one of the guys had blown out his engine. We'd seen it out there. And I had this idea that, they got 3 more backup stunt cars and all that. And we realized this was really this guy's livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
And it was what happened was really serious and really catastrophic for him. And we're kind of looking at each other. And if that show had any soul whatsoever, it kind of came out of that moment where we realized, these guys aren't in the movie business. This isn't some $100 million movie, and this is really real to this guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
they've spent hundreds of hours prepping for this moment, and it just crapped out on them like that.
Exactly, and now he couldn't take it to the next one, and that was his income.
Right.
It was a really poignant moment. I remember we kind of walked away from it, where we thought this is going to be a big, ridiculous redneck romp, and we walked away from it thinking, "Wow, this is a pretty human thing."
Yeah, that's kind of crushing, actually.
Really, it was really crushing to just be there and see it. And the moment it occurred to me, this was real to these guys,
right?
Because I'm thinking of it as a goofy cartoon I'm doing, and I figured they're all billionaires from having their stuff licensed by Hasbro anyway, and that was not.
I guess the point is to humanize them and to get that insight.
And like my dad collected antique cars. I mean, I knew at a visceral level what that stuff, when things couldn't run on the day of a show and stuff like that. I knew sort of what that felt like, just because we went to a lot of antique car shows. But I mean, to actually see it, that was not his livelihood. That was his hobby.
Right.
To actually see it, was wow, yeah, this is okay. It's different than I thought it was.
Right. All right. The last one, Voodoo Island. Do you recall Voodoo Island?
Is that a Garbage Pail Kids?
No, it was a trick question. That's a Ron Friedman episode of Starsky and Hutch.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. No, you fooled me on the trick thing, but you've already caught me, so pants down with what do you call it? I mean, I have no credibility, and I think I have the end credit on some of the stuff from Garbage Pail Kids. And so, had there been a Voodoo Island, that's fine. There could have been, Voodoo Velma, some garbage.
You've been more than generous with your time. Is there anything you'd like to cover before we let you get on with your day?
You guys actually covered everything that I think the book's about. I mean, it's it's obvious about Joe and Transformers and and D&D and Sunbow and all that. But it's also kind of a book about being a writer. It's kind of a hero's journey, and it's very much about the 80s. I covered it. He actually did better than I would, so we're good.
For our listeners, it's not only for somebody who is interested in either Transformers, G.I. Joe, Visionaries, and Humanoids. It really is way more like the Transformers component, which is what is kind of our world, was like the cherry on the sundae of the book. It's really, I cannot express how delightful it is of just like a vision of what it was like in that world in the 80s and just everything that kind of built what we loved in our childhood. And if you care about writing at all, it's also, there's another component to it. So how could we can buy, it's available on Amazon and...
Yeah, and from the publisher Rare Bird.
Okay.
Just Google Gamesmaster Rare Bird. I just like to send people to them. You get a signed version that way. It's the same price. I have no idea who'd want my signature, but I just like having the little guy get the money. I mean, Jeff Bezos is on food stamps right now, so he's not worried about his COVID payment. So,
like I said, we do still do analysis on the now every episode that we put out is generally covering one G1 episode. If you were available, it would be great to have you on when we cover one that you were heavily involved
Prime
with.
Target.
I was thinking Prime Target. It'd be great to have you on.
Sure.
Backstory humor.
I'd be happy to talk about that, or Five Faces of Darkness when it comes out.
We'll get there.
I wrote shockingly few episodes because that wasn't my job. You know what I mean? I wrote them when we were in trouble.
Yeah.
Right. Sometimes the best thing comes from quick moves, right?
Well, there was no danger of overthink. That was this. Writing as fast as you could, which is in the book, by the way. Okay, talk to you guys later on.
Thanks so much, Flint.
Great, I'm happy to come back anytime. I thoroughly enjoy this. And
Flint, it was awesome. Thank you.
See you later.
Okay, bye-bye.
just want to say, obviously, thanks again to Flint Dille for giving us just a hugely generous amount of his time to talk to three fans and to talk about his book, The Gamesmaster. I cannot seriously recommend it enough. It's so good. Go and check it out. Go and buy it. And I guess that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. All right, everybody.
It was great. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Cells is the sponsor of Autopod Decepticast. Yes.